Did you know that a single, almost absurdly theatrical act of anger could ignite a fire that would burn an entire continent for 30 years? What if I told you that the fate of millions, the redrawing of maps, and the birth of our modern world all began in one stuffy room, with a heated argument and a very long fall from a window? You are there now, standing in the shadows of Prague Castle on a spring day in 1618. You can feel the cool stone beneath your feet and smell the faint scent of old wood, beeswax, and damp earth. Through the tall Gothic window, you see the city of 100 spires glistening in the late morning sun. But inside this room, a storm is gathering. The air is thick, not just with dust motes dancing in the light, but with resentment, fear, and a righteous fury that has been simmering for years. Few people today can trace the deep, tangled roots of this conflict, and even fewer understand how this one moment of defiance plunged Europe into its darkest century. As this story begins to unfold, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. We are all here together, about to witness the spark. The room is part of the Bohemian It's not a grand throne room, but an administrative office where decisions are made and power is wielded. And on this day, May 23rd, it has become a courtroom. An angry delegation of Protestant noblemen has arrived, their faces grim, their hands resting on the pummels of their swords. They are led by a man named Count Thurn, whose indignation radiates from him like heat from a forge. Opposite them stand two men, the imperial regents, representatives of the Holy Roman Emperor. Their names are Willem Slavata and Jaroslav Borita Z. Martinic. They look a bit smug, a bit dismissive, profoundly underestimating the temperature of the room. They are the immovable object, and Count Thurn's delegation is the irresistible force. You watch as they argue, the voices rising from a low murmur to angry shouts that echo off the vaulted ceiling. The Protestants are accusing the regents of violating a sacred promise, the Letter of Majesty, a document that guaranteed their right to practice their faith without interference. They speak of churches being shut down, of their freedoms being trampled by the new, fiercely Catholic king who is set to rule them, a man named Ferdinand. The regents, Slavata and Martinic, simply refuse to yield. They are loyal to their king and to their faith. They see the Protestants not as countrymen with legitimate grievances, but as heretics and rebels. The tension becomes unbearable. The argument is no longer about legal documents or religious doctrine. It has become personal, a raw confrontation of power and belief. Then, Count Thurn and his men make a decision. A terrifying, irreversible decision. They declare the regents guilty of violating the rights of the Bohemian people. And they decide on a punishment, a traditional and very specific Bohemian punishment. It's called defenestration, the act of throwing someone out of a window. You watch in stunned silence as the Protestant lords seize the two regents. Slavata and Martinic are no longer smug. Their faces are masks of pure terror. They plead, they pray, they struggle, but they are outnumbered. The mob of nobles drags them towards the tall window, the one looking out over the castle moat. Their terrified secretary, a man named Philip Fabricius, is grabbed too, for good measure. One by one, they are heaved out. For a moment, you see them silhouetted against the bright sky, flailing, before they disappear from view. A 70-foot drop. This event, now famously known as the Second Defenestration of Prague, should have been a death sentence. Miraculously, all three men survived the fall. How? Well, that depends on who you ask, and it created one of history's most bizarre bits of propaganda. The Protestant version of the story, the one that spread like wildfire, claimed the men survived because they landed in a giant, soft, stinking pile of horse manure and other refuse that had accumulated in the dry moat below the castle. It was a joke to them, a sign that God had no time for these imperial stooges. The Catholics, however, told a very different tale. They insisted that the men were caught by the gentle hands of angels and lowered safely to the ground, a clear sign of divine intervention and God's favor. Historians still debate whether the defenestration was a spontaneous act of rage or a carefully premeditated political move by Count Thurn to provoke an open rebellion. Whatever the intent, the act was done. There was no going back. From that window in Prague, not just 3 men, but the entirety of Europe, began a long dark fall into chaos. The echoes of that fall from the Prague window spread far beyond the castle walls. To understand why this single act of rebellion didn't just end in a local skirmish, you have to zoom out. Imagine looking at a map of Europe in the early 17th century. Your eyes are drawn to its heart, a sprawling, messy entity called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, its name is one of history's better jokes. As the philosopher Voltaire would later quip, it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Instead, you see a patchwork quilt of over 300 individual states. There are kingdoms, duchies, free cities, and tiny principalities, all stitched together in a fragile, complicated web of allegiances and rivalries, all nominally under the authority of one emperor. It's less a unified nation and more a gigantic, dysfunctional family reunion where everyone holds a grudge and has their own set of house rules. The emperor's power was often more theoretical than absolute, and the real authority lay with the local princes and electors, the powerful nobles who had the right to choose the next emperor. This decentralized structure made it incredibly volatile. A fire starting in one corner could easily spread to the whole tattered quilt. And for the last century, a slow-burning fire had been smoldering beneath the surface. This was the fire of the Reformation. You have to picture a time when Europe was united by one single, overarching Christian faith. The Catholic Church was the sun around which everything orbited. It wasn't just a religion, it was the culture, the government, the science, the very lens through which you understood your existence. Then, 100 years before our friends fell into the manure pile, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed a list of 95 arguments to a church door, and in doing so, he took a hammer to the great mirror of Christendom. It shattered. Suddenly, there were 2 ways of seeing God, 2 paths to salvation. Protestantism spread rapidly, challenging the authority of the Pope and creating a profound spiritual and psychological rift across the continent. This wasn't just a polite disagreement over theology, it was a fundamental clash of worldviews. To Catholics, the Protestants were dangerous heretics tearing apart the sacred unity of the Church. To Protestants, the Catholic Church was a corrupt and decadent institution that had lost its way. There was no middle ground. Each side believed the other was leading souls to damnation. In an attempt to stop the bleeding, the Empire had signed a treaty back in 1555 called the Peace of Augsburg. It was a classic political compromise, a patch-up job designed to stop the princes from fighting each other. Its core principle was a Latin phrase, cuius regio orgeoa, which translates to, whose realm, his religion. In simple terms, the local prince got to decide whether his territory would be Lutheran or Catholic. If you, a humble cobbler or farmer, found your prince had chosen a faith different from your own, you had 2 choices: convert, or pack your bags and move to a land ruled by a prince who shared your beliefs. For a time, this fragile truce held, but it had a fatal flaw, a ticking time bomb embedded in its text. The treaty only recognized 2 faiths, Catholicism and Lutheranism. It completely ignored the fastest growing and most dynamic Protestant faith of the time, Calvinism. This was like making a peace treaty between lions and bears, while pretending that tigers don't exist. The Calvinists were left in a legal and spiritual limbo, unrecognized and unprotected. This unresolved tension turned the Holy Roman Empire into a spiritual and military tinderbox. By the early 1600s, the princes and rulers had formed 2 opposing military alliances, like 2 superpowers in a Cold War. On one side was the Protestant Union, and on the other, the Catholic League. They eyed each other with suspicion, stockpiled weapons, and interpreted every move the other side made as an act of aggression. Historians still debate whether the 30 Years' War was truly a religious war, or if it was a political struggle with a religious excuse. Was it about the salvation of souls, or was it about princes trying to gain more power and independence from the emperor? The truth, as it often is likely a messy combination of both. Faith and politics were so deeply intertwined that they were impossible to separate. For the men in that room in Prague, the Protestant nobles of Bohemia, this was not an abstract debate. Their new king, Ferdinand, was a hardline Catholic, and they were largely Protestant, with a strong Calvinist streak. The defenestration wasn't just an outburst, it was the inevitable spark landing in the heart of that perfectly prepared tinderbox. With the emperor's regents unceremoniously evicted from the chancellery window, the Bohemian rebels have crossed a line from which there is no return. They have rejected their king, but a throne cannot remain empty for long. You can feel the nervous energy in Prague. The rebellion needs a leader, a symbol, a new king to rally behind. The stage is now set for a clash between two men who could not be more different. Two men who will become the faces of the war's first, devastating chapter. On one side, you have the deposed king, Ferdinand. Picture him. He is not a flamboyant monarch. He is stern, severe, and deeply, unshakably devout. Educated by the Jesuits, Ferdinand sees the world in black and white, in terms of divine truth and damnable heresy. He believes, with every fiber of his being, that he has a sacred duty from God to restore the primacy of the Catholic faith. For him, Protestantism is not just a different opinion. It is a cancer on the soul of Christendom, and his destiny is to be the surgeon who cuts it out. When he hears that his Bohemian subjects have thrown his representatives from a window, you can imagine his reaction is not one of political calculation, but of cold, righteous fury. This is not just treason against him, it is blasphemy against God. On the other side, the Bohemian nobles cast their eyes towards a young, dashing prince. His name is Frederick V, the Elector Palatine. If Ferdinand is the embodiment of rigid old world authority, Frederick is the image of youthful Protestant hope. He is handsome, charismatic, and married to the ambitious and intelligent Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of King James I of England. His court in the city of Heidelberg is a vibrant center of Renaissance art and science. One of its most famous features was the magnificent Hortus Palatinus, a terraced garden of such beauty and complexity that it was sometimes called the eighth wonder of the world. It was a paradise of fountains, grottos, and exotic plants, a symbol of order and enlightened rule. Frederick is the head of the Protestant Union, the military alliance of German Protestant states. In the eyes of the Bohemian rebels, he is the perfect candidate. He is powerful, well-connected, and a leading Calvinist. So they make him an offer. They offer him the crown of Bohemia. You can almost feel the agonizing weight of that decision settling on Frederick's shoulders. Accepting the crown is not like accepting a dinner invitation. It is a declaration of war. It is a direct, personal challenge to Ferdinand and the entire Habsburg dynasty, the most powerful family in Europe. To accept is to gamble everything, his lands, his title, his life, on the hope that he can win. His court is divided. His advisors argue endlessly. Some urge caution, warning that he is picking a fight he cannot win, that his father-in-law in England is famously reluctant to get involved in continental squabbles. But others, including his beloved wife Elizabeth, push him to be bold. They see a historic opportunity to champion the Protestant cause, to break the Habsburg stranglehold on the imperial throne, and to become a great king in his own right. Historians still debate Frederick's state of mind. Was he a naive idealist who truly believed in the cause, or a weak and vain young man swayed by the promise of a royal title and the ambitions of those around him? Imagine you are in the room as he paces back and forth, the fate of millions resting on his answer. For Ferdinand, the path is clear, a holy crusade to reclaim what is rightfully his. His resolve is forged in the iron of absolute certainty. But for Frederick, the path is shrouded in fog. He must weigh faith against pragmatism, ambition against the risk of total annihilation. The Bohemian crown is a poisoned chalice. It offers the sweet taste of glory, but could destroy him and everyone he loves. After weeks of hesitation, he makes his choice. He accepts. He will be the new king of Bohemia. In the autumn of 1619, he and Elizabeth make their grand entry into Prague to cheering crowds. It is a moment of triumph, a storybook coronation. But as the cheers echo through the city, the armies of the Catholic League, funded by the immense wealth of the Habsburgs and fueled by Ferdinand's righteous anger, are already beginning to march. The Game of Thrones has begun, and winter is coming for the new king. Your new king, Frederick V, and his queen, Elizabeth, settle into their royal duties in Prague. For a fleeting moment, there is a sense of celebration. Banquets are held, and hopeful proclamations are issued. But as autumn fades and the first snows of 1619 begin to dust the city's spires, a chill sets in that has nothing to do with the weather. Frederick's reign would last for just one winter, earning him the poignant and ultimately tragic nickname, the Winter King. You can almost feel the foundations of his new kingdom trembling from the start. Frederick, a devout Calvinist, brings his own austere sensibilities to the vibrant, culturally complex city of Prague. He and his court frown upon the statues and elaborate decorations in the city's churches, seeing them as idolatry. In a particularly disastrous public relations move, his court preacher orders the destruction of priceless art in St. Vitus Cathedral, infuriating the local population, both Catholic and Lutheran. You watch as the initial enthusiasm for the new king begins to curdle into resentment. He is seen as a foreigner, an outsider who doesn't understand the soul of Bohemia. Meanwhile, beyond the borders of his fragile kingdom, the storm gathers with terrifying speed. While Frederick was accepting his crown, his rival, Ferdinand, was not idle. In August 1619, Ferdinand was officially elected Holy Roman Emperor, becoming Ferdinand II. This was a catastrophic blow to the rebels. Their enemy was no longer just a king they had deposed. He was now the supreme ruler of the entire empire, with all its legal and military authority behind him. The great Protestant powers that Frederick had counted on for support proved to be unreliable. His own father-in-law, King James of England, offers words but no soldiers. The Dutch provide some financial aid, but are too busy with their own war against Spain to offer more. The other German Protestant princes are terrified of the emperor's wrath and decide to sit on the fence. Frederick is increasingly isolated, a king with a borrowed crown and an army of dwindling morale. His soldiers are poorly equipped and, crucially, unpaid. An army that isn't paid is a dangerous, unreliable thing. The inevitable confrontation arrives in the autumn of 1620. An imperial army, a formidable force of seasoned Catholic League soldiers under the command of the brilliant and ruthless Count Tilly, marches into Bohemia. Frederick's army, outnumbered and demoralized, retreats towards Prague. They take up a defensive position on a low plateau just outside the city, a place called Bílá Hora, or White Mountain. You were there on the morning of November 8th. A thick, damp fog clings to the battlefield, muffling sound and hiding the enemy. The air is cold and heavy with dread. You can see the Bohemian troops, a mix of mercenaries and local militia, shivering in their lines, their faces etched with anxiety. Historians still debate the state of the rebel army that morning. Some argue their will to fight had already been broken by months without pay and incompetent leadership, making the outcome almost a foregone conclusion. The battle, when it finally begins, is a shocking, brutal anticlimax. It is not an epic day-long struggle. It lasts for little more than an hour. The imperial forces, chanting and confident, charge up the hill. The Bohemian lines waver, then break, and then dissolve into a frantic, chaotic rout. It is a total collapse. Frederick himself isn't even on the battlefield. He is back in the city, having lunch, completely unaware of the disaster unfolding just a few miles away. By the time he realizes what has happened, it is too late. His reign is over. That evening, you watch as the Winter King and his family flee Prague in a desperate panic, leaving behind the royal crown and all their possessions. Their dream has vanished in a single, bloody afternoon. For the city of Prague and the Bohemian rebels, the nightmare was just beginning. Ferdinand's vengeance was swift and terrible. The rebellion was crushed, its leaders executed in Prague's old town square, and Protestantism was ruthlessly stamped out. The first act of the war was over, and it ended in a devastating victory for the emperor. With the Winter King in exile and Bohemia brought to heel, you might think the story would end there. A rebellion is put down, the rightful ruler is restored, and peace returns. But that is not how this new kind of war works. It has a life of its own now, a ravenous hunger that cannot be satisfied with a single victory. To understand why the conflict didn't just stop in 1620, you have to look past the kings and the causes and follow the money. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. Wars are fantastically expensive, and in the 17th century, most states were perpetually on the verge of bankruptcy. So how do you pay for the massive armies, like the one Count Tilly led to victory at White Mountain? The answer is simple and brutal. You don't, at least, not in the way you might think. The age of the professional state-funded national army was still far in the future. Instead, you are in the era of the military entrepreneur. Imagine a powerful ruler like Emperor Ferdinand II. He needs an army, but his treasury is empty. So he contracts a military specialist, a nobleman with a talent for warfare and organization. This general is essentially a CEO of a very violent corporation. He signs a contract to raise, equip, and lead an army of say 20,000 men. The emperor might provide a small down payment, some seed money to get the enterprise started. But the rest of the cost, the soldiers' wages, their food, their ammunition, is the general's problem to solve. And he solves it with a business model that is both genius and monstrous. It is summarized in the Latin phrase, bellum se ipsum allet, which means the war will feed itself. This is the horrifying economic engine that will drive the conflict for the next 3 decades. It means that the army lives off the land it occupies. It takes what it needs and what it wants from the civilian population. You are a farmer in a small German village. One day, you hear a distant rumble, a sound that grows into the tramp of thousands of feet and the clatter of wagon wheels. An army has arrived. It doesn't matter whose army it is, Protestant or Catholic. To you, they are all the same. They are a plague of hungry locusts in human form. They don't ask for supplies, they demand them. This system was formalized under the name of contributions. A town would be ordered to supply a specific amount of food, grain, beer, money, and livestock. If the town complied, it might be spared the worst. If it refused or couldn't provide the goods, the soldiers were let loose. You watch as they storm through your village, kicking in doors, emptying your barns, taking the pig you were saving for winter, the grain you needed to feed your family. This is not random looting, it is policy. It is how the war feeds itself, and the soldiers were not alone. One of the most fascinating and terrifying aspects of these armies was the trosses. This was the vast, sprawling train of camp followers that trailed behind every army. It was a mobile city of thousands of people, sometimes outnumbering the soldiers themselves. There were wives and children, merchants selling goods, blacksmiths, cobblers, cooks, and a huge number of prostitutes. This entire ecosystem, this entire city on the move, also had to be fed. So when an army descended on your territory, it wasn't just 20,000 soldiers demanding food. It was 40 or 50,000 people, a swarm that would strip a region bare in a matter of weeks. Historians debate whether this system was a calculated strategy of terror designed to break the will of the enemy, or simply the inevitable chaotic result of bankrupt states trying to wage impossibly long wars. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. It created a self-perpetuating cycle of misery. Once a region was picked clean, the army had to move on, seeking fresh territory to devour. This meant the war had to constantly expand, spreading like a contagion from one German state to the next, dragging everyone into its vortex of violence and starvation. The war should have been over, with Bohemia crushed and the Winter King's cause in ruins. A victor had been declared. The emperor's power seemed absolute. But the armies raised to fight that war did not simply vanish. They remained a vast pool of unemployed violence, a machine of destruction with no off switch, waiting for a new master and a new purpose. For a few years, an uneasy quiet settles over the empire. It is the silence of a forest after a fire, everything charred and smoking, the ground littered with the casualties of the first phase. The Protestant princes of Germany are terrified, bowing their heads in submission to the triumphant Ferdinand II. But as you look north, across the Baltic Sea, you see a new player watching these events with growing alarm and perhaps a touch of ambition. His name is Christian IV, King of Denmark and Norway. Picture Christian. He is not a cautious, calculating monarch. He is a force of nature, a true Renaissance king bursting with energy and appetites. He is a giant of a man, known for his love of grand architecture, lavish feasts, and strong drink. He has spent his reign transforming his capital, Copenhagen, into a magnificent modern city, and he possesses a confidence that borders on arrogance. He sees himself as a leading light of Protestant Europe, and he looks at the pathetic failure of Frederick V with something close to contempt. He is a Lutheran, and he watches with genuine concern as the Catholic armies of the emperor push ever northward, swallowing up Protestant territories and threatening the religious balance of the entire region. But Christian's motives are never that simple. He is also the Duke of Holstein, a territory inside the Holy Roman Empire, which gives him a legitimate seat at the table of German politics. More importantly, he has his eyes on controlling the lucrative trade routes along the great rivers of northern Germany, the Elbe and the Weser. Dominating this region would mean immense wealth and power for Denmark. So you can ask yourself, what truly drives him? Is he the pious defender of the faith, the lion of Protestantism roaring in defiance of the emperor? Or is he a shrewd opportunist, using the guise of a religious war to pursue his own dynastic and economic ambitions? Historians still debate the primary motivation for Christian's intervention. Was it a genuine crusade to save his fellow Protestants, or a calculated geopolitical move to secure Danish economic dominance in northern Germany? The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a complex and tangled mixture of both, with financial backing from England and the Dutch, who are happy to see someone else do the fighting against the Habsburgs. Christian IV makes his move. In 1625, he assembles a fresh, well-equipped army and marches south into Germany. For the beleaguered Protestants, his arrival feels like a miracle. Hope, which had seemed utterly extinguished, is rekindled. Here at last is a powerful, experienced monarch to lead their cause. For a time, it seems the tide might turn. Christian's army wins some initial skirmishes, but the Emperor Ferdinand II is no longer relying solely on the forces of the Catholic League under Count Tilly. He has a new weapon, an even more formidable general with an even larger and more ruthless army. This new imperial force, combined with Tilly's veterans, creates a two-headed monster that Christian is not prepared to face. The Danish king discovers that waging war in the ravaged heart of Germany is a far grittier and more brutal affair than he had imagined. His supply lines are stretched thin and his army is hounded at every turn. The decisive moment comes in August of 1626 at the Battle of Lotte. It is a catastrophe for the Danish king. In a confused and bloody fight, his army is cornered and systematically destroyed by Count Tilly's forces. Thousands are killed or captured, and Christian himself barely escapes with his life. The Danish lion, who had entered the war with such confidence, is now wounded and on the run. The great Protestant counterattack has not just failed, it has been utterly shattered. The defeat is total, and it leaves northern Germany completely defenseless. The Emperor's armies now surge all the way to the coast of the Baltic Sea, a high water mark of Catholic power that stuns all of Europe. The war has now definitively gone international, but the result has been to make the Emperor more powerful than ever before. The conflict has grown larger, the stakes are higher, and the suffering is about to get much, much worse. The Danish king's defeat was not just the work of the veteran General Tilly. It was the result of a new and terrifying force on the chessboard, the very weapon that Emperor Ferdinand II had unleashed to secure his victory. You heard his name whispered in the last chapter, but now you will meet him. He is Albrecht von Wallenstein. To say he is a general is to say a hurricane is a strong wind. He is something more, something new and dangerous. He is a prince of war, a man who has accumulated more power, wealth, and military might than anyone except the Emperor himself. When you picture him, don't imagine a simple soldier. See a man of immense contradictions. He is often dressed in severe, unadorned black, yet he lives in palaces of staggering opulence. His gaze is dark and piercing, the look of a man who sees the world not as a home, but as a resource to be exploited. He moves with an aura of cold, calculating menace. He is the ultimate military entrepreneur. Wallenstein's story is one of breathtaking ambition. He was born into a minor Protestant noble family in Bohemia. He was not a man of ancient lineage or inherited power. Everything he had, he built himself. He converted to Catholicism, which opened doors for him in the Habsburg court. After the Protestant defeat at White Mountain, he made a colossal fortune by buying up the confiscated lands of the exiled rebels for pennies on the dollar. He was a master of logistics and finance, a man who understood that in this new age, money was the true sinew of war. While other rulers struggled to pay their troops, Wallenstein saw an opportunity. He went to the cash-strapped Emperor Ferdinand and made him an offer that was impossible to refuse. He promised to raise, at his own expense, an entire army for the imperial cause, an army of 50,000 men. The emperor would not have to pay for their recruitment, their weapons, or their salaries. How was this possible? Wallenstein took the brutal system of war, feeding war, and perfected it, turning it into a vast, ruthlessly efficient enterprise. His army was not a Catholic army or an imperial army. It was Wallenstein's army. Its loyalty was to him, the man who ensured it was the best fed, best paid fighting force in Europe. And he paid for it by levying enormous, systematic contributions on every territory his army entered. It did not matter if the territory was Protestant or Catholic, enemy or ally. Wallenstein's administrators would arrive and present the local duke or town council with a bill. They would demand precise amounts of grain, cattle, gold, and recruits. There was no negotiation. To resist was to invite utter ruin. This system made him and his top officers fantastically wealthy, while his army swelled in size and power, a state within a state that moved across the German lands, consuming everything in its path. Yet for all his modern, ruthless efficiency, Wallenstein was a man steeped in the superstitions of his age. This formidable warlord, who could calculate the logistical needs of 100,000 men, would not make a major decision without consulting the stars. One of his most trusted confidants was his personal astrologer, an Italian named Giovanni Battista Ceni. Before a battle, before a political negotiation, Wallenstein would retreat with Ceni to study astrological charts, seeking guidance from the heavens. This combination of cold rationality and deep superstition makes him one of history's most enigmatic figures. Historians still debate whether Wallenstein was ultimately a loyal servant of the emperor, or a self-serving opportunist plotting to carve out his own kingdom. His ambitions seemed to have no limits. By 1628, he stood at the absolute pinnacle of his power. He was made Duke of Friedland and then Duke of Mecklenburg. a title that made him a prince of the empire. He commanded an army of over 100,000 men, a force loyal only to him. He had crushed the emperor's enemies and extended imperial authority to the shores of the Baltic. But he was also feared and despised, not just by his enemies, but by his allies, who saw his immense power and his brutal methods as a threat to their own existence. He was the emperor's greatest asset, and his most dangerous liability. In the years following the Danish collapse, the emperor's power is at its zenith. His armies, led by Tilly and the immensely powerful Wallenstein, seem invincible. But as you know, power, especially power as great as Wallenstein's, breeds fear and jealousy. The other Catholic princes of the empire, men who are supposed to be Ferdinand's allies, grow terrified of Wallenstein. They see his private army and his ruthless ambition not as a shield for their cause, but as a dagger pointed at their own throats. They pressure the emperor, and in 1630, Ferdinand makes a fateful decision. He dismisses Wallenstein, his most brilliant and successful general. For a moment, it seems like a step towards de-escalation, but the war has its own momentum now, and the fires, once lit, are not so easily put out. The imperial forces are now solely under the command of the old, grizzled veteran, Count Tilly, and he has his sights set on a new target. You are looking now at the city of Magdeburg. It is a jewel of northern Germany, a proud, prosperous city on the banks of the Elbe River. It was one of the first major German cities to embrace the Reformation, and for a century it has been a defiant bastion of Protestantism. Its citizens are fiercely independent, and they have openly resisted the emperor's authority, refusing to bow to his decrees. For the Catholic forces, Magdeburg is more than just a strategic prize. It is a symbol. It is the heart of the rebellion, a nest of heretics that must be cleansed. In the spring of 1631, Tilly's army surrounds the city, beginning a long and brutal siege. For months, the people of Magdeburg hold out, their courage fueled by the belief that a relief army will soon arrive. They are waiting for a new Protestant champion who has recently landed in Germany, a king from Sweden. But help does not come in time. On the morning of May 20th, 1631, Tilly's forces launch their final, overwhelming assault. They storm the walls at multiple points, and after a desperate, bloody struggle, the city's defenses collapse. What happens next is not war, it is an apocalypse. A wave of imperial soldiers, many of whom hadn't been paid in months, pours into the city. All discipline evaporates. The rules of war, flimsy as they were, dissolve into smoke. The Sack of Magdeburg begins. You must try to comprehend a scene of total chaos, where every dark human impulse is unleashed without restraint. The screams of the city's 25,000 inhabitants are lost in a symphony of destruction, and then the fires start. No one is entirely sure how. Historians still debate the cause. Was the fire set deliberately by imperial commanders as an act of ultimate terror? Was it started by the city's defenders in a final, suicidal act of defiance, to ensure the victors would inherit nothing but ashes? Or was it simply an accident, a stray spark in the chaos of the sack that grew into an uncontrollable inferno? Whatever the cause, the effect is absolute. A firestorm engulfs the city. The wind whips the flames through the narrow medieval streets, turning wooden houses into torches. You can feel the heat from miles away, see the column of black smoke that blots out the sun and turns day into a terrifying twilight. The fire shows no mercy, consuming everything and everyone in its path. The soldiers and citizens alike are trapped. The inferno rages for days. When it finally burns itself out, Magdeburg is no longer a city. It is a ghost, a blackened skeleton of ruins and charred timbers. Of the 25,000 people who lived there, it is estimated that only 5,000 survived, many by taking refuge in the city's massive stone cathedral, which was one of the few structures to withstand the flames. The devastation is so complete, so beyond the pale of what was considered acceptable even in this brutal war, that it shocks all of Europe. The event gives birth to a new, dark term, Magdeburgisierung, or Magdeburgization, which becomes a byword for total annihilation. A grim joke spreads through Protestant lands, calling the event the Magdeburg Wedding, a horrific union of the imperial army and the Virgin City, consummated in fire and death. Count Tilly, the victorious general, is said to have been horrified by what his men had done, but the damage was done. The Sack of Magdeburg was meant to be a warning. Instead, it became a rallying cry. It erased any hope of compromise and filled the Protestant world with a burning desire for vengeance. The ashes of Magdeburg are a cold, grim monument to the Protestant cause's utter collapse. The city's destruction sends a tremor of terror through the German states. It is a message written in fire and blood, a declaration that the emperor's will is absolute and resistance is futile. Hope is a scarce and dangerous commodity. But while Tilly's army was busy turning Magdeburg into a charnel house, a new actor had already stepped onto the stage, landing quietly on the shores of the Baltic a year earlier. In the summer of 1630, you see him now, a giant of a man, striding onto German soil for the first time. His name is Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden. He is called the Lion of the North, and he is about to change everything. When he lands in Pomerania, his first act is to kneel on the beach and pray, a public display of piety that announces his purpose. He is here, he claims, to defend the Protestant faith and to protect the liberties of Germany. He is a striking figure, tall and broad, with reddish blonde hair and a charisma that inspires fierce loyalty in his men. He is also a military genius, a restless innovator who has spent his reign forging a new kind of army. The forces that have been trampling Germany are mostly lumbering beasts, vast formations of pikemen and musketeers fighting in dense, unwieldy squares called tercios. They are powerful but slow, like giant armadillos. Gustavus has thrown out the old playbook. His army is a rapier. He has lightened his cannons, making them far more mobile on the battlefield. His infantry fights in smaller, more flexible units that can maneuver quickly and deliver continuous volleys of fire. He has mastered the art of combined arms, the seamless coordination of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, making his army a single, lethal organism. But his greatest innovation might be the army itself. It is not just a mob of mercenaries fighting for the highest bidder. Its core is made up of Swedish and Finnish national conscripts, men who are well drilled, highly disciplined, and motivated by a sense of patriotism and religious duty. They are paid on time, a rarity that ensures their loyalty. They march in their distinctive blue and yellow uniforms, singing psalms, and they are forbidden from the kind of random pillaging that has defined the war so far. Historians still debate the true nature of Gustavus's ambitions. Was he a pious crusader, a selfless hero of the Protestant faith, or was he a shrewd imperialist, using religion as a pretext to build a Swedish empire on the Baltic coast? His motives were likely a complex blend of both, a man who saw no contradiction between serving God and expanding his kingdom. At first, the German Protestant princes are deeply suspicious. They have seen one foreign king, Christian of Denmark, come to save them, only to be humiliated and defeated. They are wary of this new Swedish power. The influential elector of Saxony, John George, refuses to let the Swedish army pass through his lands. Gustavus is stuck, unable to move south to confront the imperial forces. The tragic irony is that this very hesitation is what sealed Magdeburg's fate. Gustavus was unable to march to its relief in time, but the horror of Magdeburg changes the political calculus. It becomes clear to the German princes that neutrality is no longer an option. Faced with a choice between a triumphant and vengeful emperor or an alliance with a Swedish king, they reluctantly choose the Swedes. John George of Saxony finally joins forces with Gustavus. The stage is now set for a titanic collision. In September 1631, near the city of Leipzig, at a place called Breitenfeld, the two armies meet. On one side, you have Count Tilly and the veteran imperial army, the force that had never known a major defeat. On the other, you have Gustavus Adolphus and his new, unproven Swedish system, bolstered by their nervous Saxon allies. The battle begins, and at first, it looks like a disaster for the Protestants. Tilly's unstoppable legions smash into the Saxon troops, who break and flee the field in a panic. The entire Protestant left flank has collapsed. It looks like a repeat of White Mountain. But this is where the genius of Gustavus shines. Instead of collapsing, his flexible Swedish brigades pivot with remarkable speed and discipline, reforming their lines to face the new threat. His mobile artillery unleashes devastating salvos of cannon fire into the dense imperial ranks. For the first time, Tilly's army has met a force it cannot simply steamroll. The tide of the battle turns, slowly at first, then with astonishing speed. By the end of the day, the invincible imperial army is not just defeated, it is annihilated. Tilly is wounded, and the remnants of his force are scattered to the winds. The victory at Breitenfeld is a thunderclap that echoes across Europe. In a single afternoon, the entire strategic situation has been reversed. The Lion of the North has roared, and the war has been reborn. The victory at Breitenfeld is more than just a military triumph. It is a psychological earthquake. The seemingly invincible Habsburg war machine has been shattered. You can feel a surge of hope, a current of electric excitement running through the Protestant lands of Germany. Gustavus Adolphus is no longer just a foreign king. He is a savior, a deliverer, hailed as a new Alexander the Great. In the months that follow, he embarks on a whirlwind campaign that is nothing short of breathtaking. He marches his blue and yellow-clad army south, then west, sweeping across central Germany. Cities that had been under imperial control for a decade throw open their gates to him. He liberates the Palatinate, the ancestral home of the hapless Winter King, and even captures the city of Mainz, the heart of Catholic power in the region. He seems unstoppable. In the spring of 1632, he marches into Bavaria, the homeland of the Catholic League, and at the Battle of Rain, he faces his old adversary, Count Tilly, for the last time. In this battle, Tilly is mortally wounded, and the last remnants of his once feared army are broken. The Lion of the North marches in triumph into Munich, the Bavarian capital. For Emperor Ferdinand II in Vienna, it is a moment of absolute crisis. His armies are in ruins, his greatest general is dead, and the Swedish king is threatening the very heart of his domains. He is desperate, and in his desperation, he turns to the only man he knows who can possibly stop the Swedish hurricane. The man he had dismissed in disgrace just 2 years earlier. He swallows his pride and sends for Albrecht von Wallenstein. Wallenstein, who has been living in opulent retirement on his vast estates, agrees to return, but on his own terms. And his terms are astonishing. He demands absolute command over all imperial armies. He demands the right to conduct his own diplomatic negotiations. He demands control over any territories he conquers. He is essentially asking to be made a military dictator, with power second only to the emperor himself. Ferdinand, with no other choice, agrees to everything. You can almost feel the shift in the atmosphere as Wallenstein returns to the field. Using his immense personal wealth and his unparalleled organizational genius, he performs a miracle. In just a few months, he raises a brand new army, a massive force of veterans and mercenaries who flock to his banner, drawn by the promise of good pay and the prestige of serving under the greatest warlord of the age. The stage is now set for the ultimate confrontation, a clash of titans that the whole of Europe watches with bated breath. On one side, Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, the tactical innovator, the charismatic leader, beloved by his men. On the other, Albrecht von Wallenstein, the Prince of War, the master of logistics and strategy, the enigmatic and feared commander. It is the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. The two great armies maneuver and shadow each other for weeks, each general wary of the other, each seeking the perfect moment to strike. Finally, in November of 1632, Near the town of Lutzen, their paths converge. A thick, soupy fog blankets the Saxon plain, a fog so dense you can barely see a few feet in front of you. It's a terrible day for a battle, but Gustavus is determined to attack. The fighting begins around midday, and it is a confused, brutal, and desperate affair. The fog turns the battlefield into a series of isolated, vicious skirmishes. Regiments get lost, firing blindly at shadows, charging into their own men. You can hear the screams, the roar of cannons, and the clash of steel, all muffled and distorted by the thick, grey air. Gustavus Adolphus, as always, leads from the front. He is a large and conspicuous target, and he is famously nearsighted, often getting too close to the action. Sometime in the early afternoon, he gets separated from his men in the swirling fog. He and his small entourage blunder directly into a unit of elite imperial cavalry. There is a flurry of shots, a desperate fight. When the smoke clears, the King of Sweden lies dead on the muddy ground. The news of his death spreads like a shockwave through the Swedish ranks. For a moment, it seems they will break. But then, one of his subordinates, a man named Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar, rallies the troops. Fueled by grief and a furious desire for revenge, the Swedes launch a final, desperate assault, and, against all odds, manage to drive Wallenstein's army from the field. Tactically, the Battle of Lutzen is a Swedish victory, but it is a victory that feels like a devastating defeat. They have lost their king, their leader, the very soul of their cause. Wallenstein retreats, his army battered but intact. Historians still debate the what-ifs of that day. What would have happened if Gustavus had survived? Could he have ended the war and created a new Protestant order in Germany? His death leaves a vacuum of leadership that no one can fill, ensuring that the war, now more chaotic and leaderless than ever, will drag on for another 16 agonizing years. The death of Gustavus Adolphus in the fog at Lutzen changes the character of the war. The great crusading hero is gone. The clear ideological lines, already blurry, now begin to dissolve completely. What is left is a grinding, cynical struggle for survival and advantage. The Swedish army, though deprived of its king, does not collapse. Under the capable leadership of Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, who governs for Gustavus's young daughter, Christina, Sweden fights on. Determined to protect the gains for which their king had sacrificed his life, the war continues, a bloody stalemate where victories are indecisive and the only constant is the suffering of the land. In this new, murky phase of the conflict, all eyes turn once again to the enigmatic figure of Wallenstein. He has done what the emperor asked. He stopped the Swedish king. But now, with Gustavus gone, he seems to have lost his sense of purpose. You watch as Wallenstein's behavior becomes increasingly strange and unpredictable. He no longer prosecutes the war with his former vigor. His massive army, which he had so miraculously assembled, now sits idle for long stretches, its immense cost continuing to drain the resources of the empire. He begins to conduct his own secret negotiations, reaching out to the Swedes, the Saxons, even the French. He talks of a universal peace, a settlement for Germany that he, Albrecht von Wallenstein, will personally broker. What is he thinking? Is this the act of a weary soldier who has seen too much bloodshed and genuinely wants to bring the conflict to an end? Or is this the ultimate power play of a man whose ambition has finally consumed him? Is he trying to force the emperor's hand? Or is he plotting to betray the emperor and carve out a kingdom for himself? Perhaps even seizing the crown of Bohemia. The air in the imperial court in Vienna is thick with suspicion. Wallenstein's enemies, the very same German princes and Spanish courtiers who had feared him before, now see their chance. They whisper in the emperor's ear, feeding him a steady diet of rumor and innuendo. They paint a picture of a general who has grown too powerful, a subject who is now a rival. They point to his inactivity on the battlefield, his secret diplomacy, his refusal to obey direct orders from the court. They present his actions not as a quest for peace, but as a prelude to treason. Emperor Ferdinand II is trapped in an impossible position. Wallenstein is the only man capable of leading his armies. But what if the whispers are true? What if the man he has entrusted with 100,000 soldiers is about to turn them against him? The emperor is a deeply religious man, but he is also a ruler who understands the brutal realities of power. He is terrified. The final straw comes when Wallenstein gathers his senior officers at the city of Pilsen and makes them sign a document. The Pilsen reverse, pledging their personal loyalty to him. To the court in Vienna, this is an open act of mutiny. It confirms their worst fears. In January 1634, Ferdinand, in secret, signs a decree that strips Wallenstein of his command and declares him a traitor. He authorizes a small group of loyal officers, including an Irish colonel named Walter Butler and a Scottish colonel named John Gordon, to take Wallenstein into custody, dead or alive. Historians still debate the extent of the conspiracy against him. Was Wallenstein genuinely plotting a coup, or was he the victim of a brilliant smear campaign orchestrated by his political rivals? The evidence is murky, circumstantial, and has been argued over for centuries. The end comes swiftly, and with the brutal efficiency of a back-alley assassination. The conspirators move to isolate Wallenstein, first killing his most loyal senior officers at a banquet. Then, on the night of February 25, 1634, a small band of Irish and Scottish soldiers, led by a Captain Devereux, bursts into the house in the town of Eger where Wallenstein is staying. They find the great general, the Prince of War, unarmed in his nightshirt. He stands, facing them, and opens his arms wide. A moment of silence hangs in the room. Then Devereux runs him through with a halberd. The most powerful man in the empire, the man who had commanded armies that made kings tremble, dies a squalid, ignominious death on a cold stone floor. His vast fortune is confiscated, and his great army is placed under new, more reliably loyal command. The emperor has eliminated the threat, but in doing so, he has once again changed the course of the war, leaving a power vacuum that a new, even more cunning, player is about to fill. With Wallenstein murdered and the Swedish army still reeling from the loss of its king, it feels as though the war might finally burn itself out. The major players are either dead or exhausted. The German lands are a wasteland, picked clean by decades of marching armies. A decisive victory for the emperor's forces at the Battle of Endblingen in late 1634 seems to be the final nail in the coffin for the Protestant cause. The Swedes are crushed, and the German princes, led by Saxony, rush to make peace with the emperor, signing the Peace of Prague in 1635. This treaty is a compromise, a desperate attempt to end the German Civil War and unite the empire against the foreign invaders, the Swedes. For a moment, a fragile peace seems possible, but if you turn your gaze westward, towards Paris, you will see a man who has been watching all of this unfold with the cold, patient eyes of a master chess player, and he is about to knock over the entire board. His name is Armand Jean Duplessis, better known to history as Cardinal Richelieu. He is the chief minister of King Louis XIII of France, and for all practical purposes, he is the ruler of the country. When you picture him, you see a man of the cloth, dressed in the scarlet robes of a cardinal of the Catholic Church. But beneath those robes beats the heart of a ruthless political pragmatist. Richelieu is a fascinating paradox. He is a devout Catholic who brutally suppressed the Protestant Huguenots within France. Yet, his one all-consuming obsession is not religion. It is the power and glory of France. He looks at the map of Europe and sees France encircled, caught in a vice by the two branches of the immensely powerful Habsburg family, who rule both Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. For Richelieu, this Habsburg encirclement is an existential threat. His life's work is dedicated to breaking it. For the first 17 years of the war, Richelieu has played a careful, clandestine game. He has avoided direct French involvement, preferring to fight a proxy war. He has sent money, subsidies, to anyone who was fighting the Habsburgs. He funded the Protestant Danish king, Christian IV. He funded the Protestant Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus. You can see the stunning cynicism in his strategy. A Catholic cardinal is secretly paying Protestant armies to kill Catholic soldiers in Germany, all for the benefit of Catholic France. But now, in 1635, his proxies are defeated. The Swedes are on the verge of collapse, and the German princes are making peace with the emperor. The Habsburgs are about to achieve a total victory, which would leave France more dangerously encircled than ever. For Richelieu, this is an unacceptable outcome. The time for secret subsidies is over. The time for open war has come. In 1635, France formally declares war on Habsburg Spain, and the next year it actively intervenes in Germany. This is the great pivot of the 30 Years' War, the moment it sheds any remaining pretense of being a religious conflict. It is now nakedly, openly, a political struggle for European dominance. You have Catholic France, allied with Protestant Sweden and the remaining Protestant German princes, fighting against the Catholic Habsburgs of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. If your head is spinning, you are not alone. The original grievances, the anger over the letter of majesty in Bohemia that started it all, have been completely forgotten, buried under an avalanche of new alliances and new ambitions. The war has become a dynastic brawl, a fight between the Bourbon kings of France and the Habsburg emperors for mastery of the continent. This French intervention breathes new life into the dying embers of the war. It provides the anti-Habsburg forces with a massive new source of soldiers, money, and leadership. French generals, like the Prince of Condé and the Viscount of Turenne, will prove themselves to be among the most brilliant commanders of the age. But for the people of Germany, this is the ultimate tragedy. Just when peace seemed within their grasp, their country is turned into the arena for a new, even larger conflict between foreign powers. Historians still debate Richelieu's legacy. Was he a visionary statesman who laid the foundations for French greatness, or a cold-hearted cynic whose policies prolonged one of the most devastating wars in human history for another 13 years, sacrificing millions of German lives for the sake of French national interest? Whatever your judgment, his decision marks the beginning of the war's final and most grueling phase, a period of relentless attritional warfare where the original causes are a distant memory and the only goal is to outlast the enemy. The entry of France transforms the war into a slow, grinding machine of pure attrition. The next decade, from the mid-1630s to the mid-1640s, lacks the dramatic, tide-turning battles of the earlier phases. There is no new Gustavus Adolphus, no single confrontation that changes everything overnight. Instead, you are watching a continent-wide wrestling match, where exhausted opponents are locked in a desperate embrace, each trying to wear the other down. The fighting is no longer confined to the heart of Germany. It spills over into the Spanish Netherlands, into Italy, and along the border between France and Spain. It has become a true world war, at least by the standards of the 17th century. The armies that march across the land are different now. The fanatical religious certainty that drove the soldiers at White Mountain is long gone. The disciplined, psalm-singing Swedes of Gustavus's era are now a minority in their own army, which has been filled out with German mercenaries. These are armies of ghosts, professional survivors who have known nothing but war for their entire adult lives. They are cynical, brutalized, and loyal only to the prospect of their next meal and their next payday. The distinction between friend and foe, soldier and civilian, has completely eroded. An army would occupy a territory, strip it bare, and move on, only to be followed by an enemy army that would do the same. And then perhaps a friendly army would return and pick over whatever scraps were left. You can picture the landscape of Germany during these years. It is a scarred, wounded place. Entire villages are abandoned, their timbered houses standing empty and silent, the fields around them overgrown with weeds. The famous German poet, Andreas Gryphius, writing in the midst of this horror, captured the feeling perfectly in a poem called Tears of the Fatherland. He wrote, "The towers stand in fire, the church is overturned, the town hall lies in ruins, the strong are cut down. This is the era of the little war, a constant, simmering violence of raids, skirmishes, and sieges. Armies would spend months besieging a single fortified town, slowly starving its inhabitants into submission. When the town finally fell, the soldiers would often be unleashed in a frenzy of plunder, a reward for their long months of hardship. But even the soldiers were not immune to the horrors. The greatest killer in the 30 Years' War was not the sword or the musket ball, it was disease. The massive armies, with their thousands of camp followers, were perfect breeding grounds for epidemics. They were mobile plague cities. As they marched, they spread typhus, which became known as camp fever, dysentery, and bubonic plague wherever they went. A commander could lose more men to sickness in a few weeks of camp than in a major battle. You can imagine the smell, the filth, the constant presence of death that was the daily reality for both the soldier and the civilian unlucky enough to be in their path. Amidst this endless cycle of violence, a new generation of commanders rises to prominence. On the French side, you have Louis de Bourbon, the Prince of Conde, a brilliant and audacious young general who wins a stunning victory over the legendary Spanish army at the Battle of Rocroi in 1643. This battle is a landmark moment. It shatters the myth of Spanish invincibility and signals the rise of France as the dominant military power in Europe. On the Swedish side, commanders like Johan Boehner and Lennart Torstensson lead incredible campaigns, marching their armies back and forth across Germany, sometimes striking as far south as Vienna itself. They are masters of the lightning raid, keeping the imperial forces constantly off balance. Historians still debate the military effectiveness of this late stage of the war. Were these campaigns achieving any real strategic objectives, or were they just spasms of violence? Armies marching and fighting simply because they no longer knew how to do anything else. The war has become a permanent condition, a harrowing fact of life. For a child born in Germany in 1618, the year of the Defenestration, the world has never known peace. War is the only reality they have ever seen. The great generals and their armies move across the map like chess pieces, their battles and maneuvers recorded in the grand pages of history. But you are not a king or a general. You are a farmer, a blacksmith, a baker, a mother. Your world has shrunk to the size of your village, and the war is not a distant political struggle. It is a constant, gut-wrenching dread, a predator that stalks the edges of your life, waiting for its moment to pounce. For you, the war is not about dates and treaties. It is about the sound of a distant drum, the smell of smoke on the wind, the panicked lowing of cattle, the sight of a neighbor's roof bursting into flame. It is the raw, unfiltered experience of surviving the unlivable. Imagine you are in your small cottage on a quiet afternoon. The first sign is a sound, a low rumble on the horizon that isn't thunder. It grows steadily, resolving itself into the tramp of thousands of feet, the jangle of equipment, the shouts of men. Fear, cold and sharp, clutches at your heart. You grab your children, a small bundle of bread, and run. You run to the secret hiding place you have prepared deep in the woods, a damp cave or a cleverly concealed ditch. You are not alone. The whole village is there, huddled together in silence, listening as the army descends upon your homes. It does not matter whose flag they fly, Swedish blue, imperial white, or French lily. To you, they are all the same. They are a force of nature, a human flood that will sweep away everything you have built. You wait, for hours, perhaps for days, until the noise finally recedes, and a terrifying silence returns. When you emerge, your world has been turned inside out. The soldiers are gone, and so is everything else. Your cottage has been ransacked, the door kicked in, your meager possessions smashed or stolen. The barn is empty. The livestock you depended on for milk and meat and plowing your fields is gone. The grain you had stored for the winter has been taken or scattered in the mud. This is the calculated cruelty of the war feeding itself. But for you, it is a death sentence delivered quietly, without a single shot being fired. How will you survive the coming winter? How will you feed your children? Survival becomes a grim art form. You learn to bury your food in secret caches in the forest. You learn which roots and barks are edible. You learn to live like a hunted animal, constantly vigilant, trusting no one. The breakdown of society is absolute. The law is gone, replaced by the law of the strongest. Bands of desperate deserters, called marauders, roam the countryside, more dangerous than any formal army because they have nothing left to lose. The very fabric of nature seems to be unraveling. One of the most common observations from this period is the explosion of the wolf population. With the human population decimated and the fields untended, the wolves grew bold, roaming through abandoned villages in broad daylight, a chilling symbol of a world returned to a primal, savage state. A famous novel from the period, Simplicis Simplicissimus by Grimmelshausen, paints a vivid, often brutal picture of this upside-down world, following a simple boy who is forced to become a soldier, a hermit, a jester, anything to survive the chaos. It captures the psychological toll, the way the war strips away your identity and forces you to become someone you no longer recognize. Historians debate the nature of survival in this period. Was it simply a lottery, a matter of pure luck that you happened to be in the right place when an army passed by, or hiding in the right patch of woods? Or did community bonds and human ingenuity play a decisive role? In some areas, villagers organized themselves into peasant militias to fight back, though they were often brutally crushed. And in the darkest corners of the famine-stricken lands, you hear whispers of things that happen when the hunger becomes absolute, when all morality dissolves. Rumors of cannibalism, of people driven to the ultimate taboo to stay alive, become a part of the psychological terror of the age. For a generation that lived through this, the scars were not just physical, it was a deep wound in the soul, a loss of faith, not just in princes or in God, but in the very idea of a stable, humane world. You can only fight for so long. Even the most powerful kings and the most stubborn generals eventually feel the numbing exhaustion of a war without end. By the early 1640s, every side is staggering. Sweden's treasury is empty. France is facing internal rebellions. The Fronde, fueled by the crippling taxes needed to pay for the war. The Spanish Empire is cracking under the strain. And the Emperor in Vienna, now Ferdinand III, son of the man who started it all, knows that his dream of a unified Catholic empire is a fantasy. Everyone wants peace. The problem is, nobody knows how to get it. A generation of diplomats and leaders has grown up knowing only conflict. Peace is a foreign language. They have forgotten how to speak. The first whispers of a peace conference begin as early as 1638, but it takes years of agonizing, preliminary negotiations just to decide where to meet and who should be invited. You are watching a process of incredible, maddening complexity. There is no United Nations, no neutral Switzerland to host the talks. Every detail is a battleground of protocol and prestige. Should the French and Swedish delegations be treated as equals? Should the representatives of the German princes have a voice? Or should they be forced to accept whatever the emperor decides for them? The solution they finally come up with is a diplomatic novelty. The peace conference will be held in two separate cities at once, in the Westphalian towns of Munster and Osnabrück, about 30 miles apart. The Catholic powers, led by France and the Empire, will meet in the Catholic city of Munster. The Protestant powers, led by Sweden, will meet with the Empire in the mixed Catholic Protestant city of Osnabrück. The delegates will then communicate and coordinate through a constant stream of messengers riding back and forth between the two cities. The delegates begin to arrive in 1644, but the Congress doesn't formally open for many months. It is the largest diplomatic gathering in European history, a chaotic collection of 109 delegations representing the various warring states. You can imagine the scene. The narrow streets of these two small German towns are suddenly flooded with a cast of characters from across the continent. There are princes, cardinals, ambassadors, and a vast retinue of secretaries, lawyers, cooks, and servants. They travel in magnificent carriages, trying to outdo each other with displays of wealth and importance, a bizarre contrast to the devastated countryside that surrounds them. The negotiations themselves are a slow, painful dance. There are no plenary sessions where everyone sits around a big table. Instead, it is a series of bilateral meetings, of secret conversations in private chambers, of proposals and counter-proposals that are carried by couriers from one delegation to another, and all the while, the war rages on. This is one of the most cruel and bizarre aspects of the peace process. The fighting does not stop. In fact, it intensifies. Each side believes that a victory on the battlefield will strengthen its hand at the negotiating table. The armies of France and Sweden launch new offensives, trying to conquer one more town, win one more skirmish, to use as a bargaining chip. In 1645, the Swedes win a major victory at the Battle of Janko, allowing them to threaten Vienna itself. In 1648, the very year the treaty is finally signed, a combined Franco-Swedish army defeats the last major imperial force at the Battle of Zussmannshausen. You can feel the tragic absurdity of it all. Thousands of soldiers and civilians are still dying in a war that everyone has already agreed, in principle, to end. The talks drag on for 4 years. The delegates argue over every conceivable issue. They argue about which territories will change hands. They argue about the delicate religious balance within the empire, trying to find a formula that will prevent another catastrophic conflict. They argue about compensation for the armies, which refuse to disband until they are paid. One of the thorniest issues, a question that historians still debate the importance of, was the title used for the French king. Should he be addressed as Most Christian King or simply King of France? It sounds trivial, but in an age obsessed with status, these details were monumental. Slowly, painfully, through sheer exhaustion, compromises are reached. The outlines of a new European order begin to emerge from the smoke and the ink. The messengers ride faster. The arguments become less about winning the war and more about ending it. Finally, on October 24, 1648, after 4 years of talking and 30 years of killing, it is done. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief that ripples across a continent. In the town halls of Munster and Osnabrück, the exhausted diplomats put their quill pens to the parchment. You watch as the intricate seals of kingdoms and empires are pressed into warm, red wax. This is not one document, but a pair of treaties, collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia. On the surface, they are simply a set of agreements to end a war. But you are not just witnessing the end of a conflict. You are witnessing the birth certificate of the modern world. The principles laid down in this dense, legalistic text will fundamentally rewire the operating system of Europe, creating a new order from the ashes of the old. Before Westphalia, Europe was a patchwork of overlapping authorities. A prince might rule a territory, but his authority was always limited. He was subject to the higher authority of the Holy Roman Emperor, and everyone, in theory, was subject to the spiritual and sometimes political authority of the Pope in Rome. It was a messy, hierarchical system, a legacy of the medieval dream of a universal Christian empire. The Peace of Westphalia takes a sledgehammer to that dream. It establishes a new, revolutionary principle that will come to be known as Westphalian sovereignty. The core idea is simple, but its consequences are immense. Each state, no matter how large or small, is sovereign within its own territory. The ruler has the right to determine the state's domestic policies, including its official religion, without external interference. The emperor's power over the individual German states is drastically curtailed. He is still an emperor, but he can no longer raise taxes, declare war, or make laws without the consent of the princes. The states of the empire are now independent actors on the world stage, free to form their own alliances. You are watching the concept of the nation-state, a defined territory with a single, supreme government, being chiseled into international law. The religious question, the spark that lit the whole inferno, is finally settled with a characteristic political compromise. The Peace of Augsburg is reaffirmed and, crucially, it is updated to officially recognize Calvinism alongside Catholicism and Lutheranism. The principle of cuius regio, ius religio, is also modified. The year 1624 is established as the normal year. Whatever a territory's official religion was on January 1st, 1624, is what it will remain. Furthermore, Christians living in a state where their denomination is not the official one are granted the right to practice their faith in private. It is not modern religious freedom, but it is a massive step away from the brutal fanaticism that had fueled the war. It is a tacit admission that faith cannot be imposed by the sword. Of course, the peace also involves a massive redrawing of the map. The winners collect their prizes. France makes significant gains, acquiring territory in Alsace and Lorraine, giving it a crucial foothold on the Rhine River. Sweden is handsomely rewarded for its long struggle, receiving a huge cash payment and control of valuable territories in northern Germany, effectively making the Baltic Sea a Swedish lake. A newly empowered state, Brandenburg-Prussia, also emerges with more territory, setting it on the path to becoming a major European power. The losers are the Habsburgs. The emperor's authority is hollowed out, and the Spanish branch is weakened, its long decline now accelerating. One of the most curious details is the reaction of the Pope. From his throne in Rome, Pope Innocent X read the terms and was utterly apoplectic. He saw the treaty's acceptance of Protestant rights and its assertion of state power over religious matters as a direct assault on the authority of the Catholic Church. He issued a papal bull declaring the treaties null, void, invalid, iniquitous, unjust, damnable, reprobate, inane, empty of meaning and effect for all time. Nobody paid any attention. The age of papal authority dictating European politics was over. Historians still debate whether the Peace of Westphalia was a revolutionary moment that invented the modern state, or simply a legal stamp on a reality that had been emerging for centuries. Either way, the world you live in, a world of independent countries with defined borders, is the direct descendant of the order created in that room. The ink on the treaties is dry. The couriers have carried the news to the far corners of the empire. The war is over, but peace does not arrive like a sudden dawn. It is more like a slow, hesitant thaw after a brutal ice age. The armies do not simply vanish. It will take years for the tens of thousands of soldiers to be paid off and finally disbanded. For now, you are traveling through the German lands in the year 1649. The fighting has stopped, but the war is everywhere. It is in the silence. You walk through a village that once would have bustled with life, with the sounds of children playing, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of the marketplace. Now there is nothing. The houses stand like hollow skulls, their thatched roofs collapsed, their windows like vacant eyes. A single chimney stands sentinel over a pile of charred rubble. The church bell, which once marked the hours of a human day, is silent, perhaps melted down for a cannon years ago. You continue through the countryside, and the devastation is of a different kind. The fields, which should be green with new crops, are a tangled wilderness of thorns and scrub. The neat lines of cultivation have been erased. You see the skeletal remains of a barn, its great timbers blackened by fire. There are no cows in the pasture, no sheep on the hills. The war has eaten them all. This is the staggering, incalculable cost of 30 years of war-feeding war. It wasn't just the battles. It was the relentless, systematic stripping of the land, year after year, that broke the back of the country. You are looking at a demographic catastrophe that is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend. The numbers are an academic's game, but they tell a haunting story. The most commonly cited figure, a piece of knowledge taught for centuries, is that the 30 Years' War wiped out roughly 1/3 of the population of the Holy Roman Empire. Think about that. For every 3 people you would have met in 1618, a man tilling his field, a woman selling bread, a child chasing a dog, one of them is now gone. The total population of the empire may have fallen from around 20 million to as low as 12 million. Historians, of course, argue over the precise figures. It was not a uniform disaster. Some regions, like the bustling port city of Hamburg, were largely spared and even prospered. But other areas were scenes of almost total annihilation. The Duchy of Württemberg lost an estimated 75% of its people. Pomerania, the land where Gustavus Adolphus first landed, suffered similar losses. In some parts of the Palatinate, the original heartland of the Winter King, the population loss may have approached 90%, and it is crucial to remember that direct combat was one of the least significant causes of death. The true killers were the grim horsemen who rode in the army's wake. Famine and disease. For every soldier killed by a bullet, 10 more people, soldiers and civilians alike, died from starvation or from the plagues that festered in the camps and were spread to every town and village. There was also a less visible, but equally devastating, economic collapse. In the early years of the war, a period of hyperinflation known as the Kipper under Whippersite. The Kipper and Whipper time had wrecked the economy. Rulers, desperate for cash to pay their armies, would clip their coins, shaving off bits of silver, or tip the balance, melting down coins and reissuing them with cheaper metals like copper. The result was financial chaos. Savings were wiped out, trade collapsed, life became a desperate barter for scraps. It was the final turn of the screw, a man-made disaster that ensured that even those who escaped the sword and the plague would be ruined. The recovery from this would not take years. It would take generations. In many parts of Germany, it would take a full century for the population and the economy to return to the levels they had been at before that fateful day in Prague. The armies finally disperse. The fields, ever so slowly, begin to feel the touch of the plough again. The survivors emerge from the forests and the ruins, blinking in the unfamiliar light of peace. But you can see that the wounds of this war are not just on the landscape or in the population figures. There is a deeper wound, a scar etched into the memory, the culture, the very soul of the German people. You are witnessing the birth of a collective trauma, a set of ghosts that will haunt the German imagination for centuries to come. The 30 Years' War was not like other wars. It was not a conflict fought by professional soldiers on distant battlefields. It was a war that was everywhere, a war that invaded the home, the village, the family. It was 30 years of powerlessness, of being at the mercy of forces utterly beyond your control. Think of the psychological impact on a child who grew up during this time. Their first memories might be of hiding, of hunger, of the terrifying sight of strange men in armor. They learned that the world was an unpredictable and savage place, that security was an illusion, and that strangers were a source of mortal danger. This deep-seated fear and mistrust became part of the cultural DNA. For generations, German folklore would be filled with terrifying tales of the wild soldiers, the Swedes and the Croats, who were used to frighten children into obedience. The phrase, "May the Swedes get you," became a common curse. This was more than just a memory of hardship. It was a foundational experience of vulnerability that shaped a national psyche. This trauma found its voice in the art and literature of the era. The style that flourished during and after the war is called the Baroque, and in Germany, it took on a particularly dark and tortured quality. You see it in the poetry of men like Andreas Gryphius, who wrote not of glory and heroism, but of the fragility of life and the vanity of all human endeavor. His poems are filled with images of skulls, of burning cities, of the world as a stage for a tragic play. This theme, known as vanitas, became an obsession. It's the idea that all earthly things, power, wealth, beauty, life itself, are fleeting and meaningless in the face of the terrible certainty of death. This was not an abstract philosophical concept. It was the lived reality for millions of people. A widely known woodcut from the period, by the artist Hans Ulrich Frank, shows a soldier nonchalantly leaning on his musket, using a human skull as a footrest. It is a shocking image of the complete normalization of death and brutality. This experience of chaos and fragmentation also had a profound political consequence. Historians have long debated the connection between the trauma of the 30 Years' War and the later political development of Germany. Some argue that the memory of this period, a time when Germany was weak, divided, and the helpless victim of foreign armies, created a deep-seated yearning for order, unity, and strength. It fostered a political culture that valued strong, centralized authority, a powerful state that could protect its people from the kind of chaos they had endured. This theory suggests that the seeds of German absolutism, and perhaps even the later drive for national unification under a powerful state like Prussia, were sown in the ravaged fields of Westphalia. It created a powerful narrative of victimhood and a desire to never again be the playground of Europe. You see the ghosts of Westphalia everywhere. They are in the folk tales, in the dark poetry, in the deep cultural anxiety about disorder. They are in the fortified walls that many German towns painstakingly rebuilt, a physical manifestation of a psychological need for security. It was a shared nightmare that bound the survivors together, a story they would tell their children and grandchildren, a warning of what happens when the world is turned upside down. The war may have ended in 1648, but for the people who lived through it, and for the generations that followed, the war never truly went away.